Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. For those who do not know this is based on a book from I think 2005. It's called American Prometheus. It won the author a Pulitzer. Basically, the premise of this book is it's a biography on the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man, the father of the atomic bomb. And this movie is essentially a race to build the atomic bomb and the fallout of that. Cillian Murphy, who has been a frequent collaborator with Chris Nolan, plays J. Robert Oppenheimer in this movie to really incredible effects. We'll get into his performance in a second. And this is a cast of who's. A lot of those who's I will not spoil because they come in for a scene or two and they steal the movie for that minute or two that they are on screen. Some of the ones that I will mention that are in this movie and are very clearly advertised. You have actors like Robert Downey Jr. in this movie. You have actors like Alden Ehrenreich. You get guys like Josh Hartnett, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Maybe I'm mispronouncing that. If I am, I apologize. You have guys like him. You have Matt Damon in a really good supporting turn. Emily Blunt plays Oppenheimer's, I believe it would be second wife. Florence Pugh kind of plays his first wife slash mistress. It's a cast of who's, and I'm not even really breaking the surface on who's in this movie because there's about 20 more really famous actors in this movie, all doing really incredible work on this. This is a very different film for Christopher Nolan. And like I said, I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan. That doesn't always mean that I love his style or love his sensibilities. This is a guy that I think can be a little too cold at times. I think he can struggle to express emotion. I also think he isn't always the greatest storyteller. I think he can have incredible broad stories, and I think the screenplay can really get lost at times, and the dialogue between characters can get really muddled. What's so interesting then about Oppenheimer is this is a talking movie. This is 3 hours of men just talking in rooms, and it just so happens that the implications of these top talks are the atomic bomb. And that's where I found this movie so enriching because this is a movie I've never quite seen from Christopher Nolan. If I had to compare it to any other movie, I think the most apt comparison, and I think it's one that Christopher Nolan himself has even referenced, is JFK, Oliver Stone's 1991 JFK, which is a movie about the conspiracy of the people who killed JFK. That's what this movie is, because I wouldn't say I have, based on how Christopher Nolan has talked about that, there's objective facts in this movie and there are subjective facts, and it is at your time, your responsibility to kind of figure out what is being true, what is being presented as true, and what maybe is understood as kind of historical logic, but not necessarily the definitive conclusion. We don't know certain of these conversations that took place behind rooms, but we do know who Robert Oppenheimer is, so we do know some of the broad ideas that he lived on, some of the ideas and people that he based around himself, so we do know that history, thus we are able to infer, and that's what Nolan does really well in this movie. As someone who literally studied history in college, I found this a completely enriching experience. Oppenheimer is told literally four stories kind of all colliding in on themselves. It is not a linear narrative. It is not act one, act two, act three. There are a very clear like act one ending, act two ending, but it's not done in any way that feels linear. Everything is kind of building to what we know this film is building to, and that can be really off-putting. In a film like Dunkirk, I didn't think this effect worked to any great degree. In fact, I found it convoluting the story of Dunkirk. In a film like Oppenheimer, I think it only added tension to the screenplay and the stakes and the aftermath of that, because we do follow the aftermath of this film, and I don't think that's a spoiler by any degree. It's all kind of just woven in together, and you just get this sense of dreads, you get this fallout, you get the real just emotions of before, during, and after. And it works to like such wonderful effects, because there will be like a scene where Oppenheimer's talking about the building of the atomic bomb in theory in like the 1930s. And then we'll then cut to a scene in like in the 1950s after it's happened, and that 1950s then informs a flashback that we have to the 1940s, where they are actually building the bomb. And so that for me really added an experience. This film is editing galore. Here's another, just like Oscar prediction right away. You will see Oppenheimer nominated for Best Film Editing. And right now, I think this film is the clear frontrunner. I think this film would be the clear frontrunner in any year it's nominated for Best Film Editing. It's truly a spectacular job at editing. Like I said, it's so intercut, it's so forensic. And this forensic nature of this film really adds to Christopher Nolan's just feel of this, and you can really feel this frustration, anger, and anxiety in this editing. It's such a cool tool that the director is able to utilize to benefit his story. This is a very emotional Christopher Nolan movie from a guy who is not an emotional guy as a filmmaker. Like, he's a very sincere filmmaker, but he's not somebody that I would consider an overly emotional filmmaker. In this film, you really understand Christopher Nolan as a person, as a father, as a filmmaking, as someone of a self-biography on Christopher Nolan. This is a movie about a genius who kind of feels the weight of the world on his shoulders. And to some degree, you can then kind of feel that and kind of also then describe it to Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker, where he's this filmmaker that feels an immense responsibility to basically preserve film. I'm not saying it's a perfect translations, but there are certainly, you can understand where Nolan is relating to Oppenheimer as a person. And I think that's very interesting. And you can also understand, and I think this factor is really laid out in this movie, you understand how Nolan relates to Oppenheimer as a parent. And that's a really crucial understanding of this movie. This film does have some of the typical Christopher Nolan flaws. The female characters are very much at service of Oppenheimer. Florence Pugh is probably the most wasted in this movie in the sense that she doesn't get a lot to do, but what she does is very important to the Oppenheimer story. It's just, as an actress, it kind of feels like she is shoehorned in to playing the mistress, and who delivers one really critical scene. And this one critical scene, or I guess there's really two, but there's one specifically, and you'll notice it very much in the movie. It's after a lovemaking sequence, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when you see the film. This is kind of, to some degree, I wouldn't say necessarily the thesis of Oppenheimer, but there is a scene where he is reading something to the Florence Pugh character. And it's in that moment you kind of understand the stakes, the emotion, and then when you kind of get to the third act and you learn the history of Oppenheimer and this woman, it makes it far more devastating, and it's also kind of the only connection that we have to Oppenheimer as humans, because Oppenheimer is not a conventional good guy, he's not a conventional bad guy, he's a guy that's a really complicated, closed-off guy. So it's hard to bear and understand emotion of Oppenheimer, so this Florence Pugh scene really delivers a lot of it, but she is in service of Oppenheimer. You don't feel like she is much of a character outside of it, to the point where she literally leaves the film for extended periods of times, and you kind of forget about her by design. Emily Blunt is literally sidelined for a majority of the movie, except they finally give her one scene, and her one scene is killer. That's really like the factor of this movie. There's so many talented actors coming to play for Nolan, and when they come to play for Nolan, they just deliver an A game. They come out and leave, and they're spectacular in these roles. Again, I don't want to really talk about them, but I did mention a few of them. Rami Malek is one of these guys. Rami Malek is in the movie for probably a total of maybe 5 minutes, and he's absolutely incredible in those 5 minutes. And there's a lot of actors like that. There's other then supporting actors who are in this movie more heavily. Robert Downey Jr. is a performance that you're going to hear a lot about. Turn on the TikTok cameras right now. Huge prediction from me. Robert Downey Jr., come March 10th, 2024, when the Oscar ceremony airs, not only will Robert Downey Jr. be nominated for his performance in Oppenheimer, you're going to see Robert Downey Jr. win an Academy Award Best Supporting Actor for his role in Oppenheimer. I think he's legitimately that great. I think any year Robert Downey Jr. would be the front runner. So if you can take that bet, if you can find somehow where Vegas is going to take that bet really early, take it right now. I'm money in the bank to me. I feel so good about this prediction. I know it's way too early to make a prediction like this, but I feel great in this, and he is so deserving of that. This performance that Robert Downey Jr. does is so complicated. It is so... And this is where I'm really trying to be careful with spoilers, because if you don't know who this man is in history, it becomes very, it can kind of come as a surprise to some of the things that he does or doesn't do, all that. What I will say is Downey Jr. is tasked with playing a very hard character. Outside of Oppenheimer, probably the most confusing character to get a read of. And much of the film is asked to like kind of bear the weight. Like Robert Downey Jr. is asked to bear much of the weight in this movie, where it's just like, well, there's going to be long extended scenes where you're kind of the protagonist for a majority of like these next 15-20 minutes. Like, kind of do your thing. And Downey does it in spectacular degrees. Very nuanced performance, very real performance, very scary performance at times, very funny performance. It just uses the whole kind of meal that is Robert Downey Jr. as an actor. There's so much to this performance that I love. Cillian Murphy, let's talk about him, the man of the hour. This is a spectacular performance. You will never see another better type of performance in a movie like this. I mean, this is truly just revolutionary, insightful, deep, profound work that Cillian Murphy is doing. And it's a very soft performance. Murphy, as an actor, is not an over-the-top. He's a very subdued actor, and that's how Oppenheimer is portrayed in this movie. And based on American Prometheus, that really sounds like how Oppenheimer is portrayed in general and kind of understood. So it's a very layered performance, and it's also a performance that feels very reserved. It's not this over-the-top performance, but Murphy just does so much acting, specifically through his like piercing blue eyes. There is some devastating scenes in there. One actor that I wanted to mention, and I'm blanking on his name, he plays Albert Einstein in this movie, which again, not a spoiler if you've seen the trailers, because Einstein is in those trailers. This actor who plays Einstein is also incredible. Again, this is, I just keep kind of hitting back to like every actor who's in this movie is really good. I don't think there's a weak link in this movie in terms of acting. Even ones whose stories are a little sidelined, like the Florence Pugh character, they are great at what they are giving. They're just not giving a lot. Oppenheimer does suffer this idea that I kind of talked about earlier, where it is very convoluted and it feels very slow at times. The first 30 minutes of this movie are a drag. They're a drag in a good way, though, and they really do inform the rest of the 2.5-hour movies. Watching it for the first time, though, you do really feel the length of it. There's some sound editing in this movie. There's some like really technical parts that I could talk about. It does have the Nolan question of, are you deaf? Like, there's some weird sound mixing where I'm just like, you're really like, why can't I hear what is on screen right now? Like, I'm struggling to hear it, and I'm seeing it in like 70mm IMAX. Like, in theory, I'm seeing it in the best possible situation for me to watch it, and yet I still had at times trouble hearing it. There's some of those critiques. In terms of the actual filmmaking, though, it's pretty impeccable. The third act does take a very direct turn in this movie, and it does become a little bit more conventional and straightforward compared to the rest of this movie. I like that, but I can also see where it becomes a drag. Like I said, this is not a perfect movie. It's a very impassioned movie by Christopher Nolan. This is a movie that I didn't know he had in him, to be honest. Like I said, I compared this a little earlier to JFK, Oliver Stone's JFK. What's so interesting is how sincere this movie is, and yet it's still very similar to JFK. Because JFK, if you've never seen Oliver Stone's JFK, which I think is also a masterpiece, is a movie that is deeply inherently cynical. And in this movie, it's not. Like, it's very heavy on its burden. Like, you really feel the emotions, the weight of this. In JFK, you really feel like these characters are almost kind of bemused by this. In Oppenheimer, you really feel the horror of this, and it plays like a true horror film. The sequence that everyone will probably be talking about in this movie involving an explosion, this scene is a horror film. It is 30 minutes of probably the best filmmaking Christopher Nolan has ever done in his career. Point blank. Legitimately was stunned during this sequence. And like I said, there's a lot that works in here. There's some elements that maybe don't work as well. It is very impassioned at times. It's very cold at times. It's kind of hard to get a read and engage on some of these characters. It's all edited so quick and fast. And like, technically I'd have criticisms of it, but I'm just kind of so in awe of the filmmaking and what Nolan is accomplishing and trying to accomplish. And it's just the biggest swing to the fences I've ever seen Nolan do. Of a guy who I think every movie he goes for, he tries swinging for the fences. He does that in this movie as well. And it connects so much. It's just such a really impressive film. And I will just say the final 5 minutes of this film is a masterpiece in itself. I really liked Oppenheimer. It's well worth your time. I hope one day I get to do like the spoiler review where I just get to really dive deep into this movie. Hopefully I get to do that sometime soon. But for that, Oppenheimer, I'm giving it the full 5-star review here. I think it is a 5-star out of 5-star movie. Like I said, are there criticisms of this movie? Sure. I don't care about the criticisms, honestly. I think it's just it's my favorite movie of 2023 at this moment. I don't see any movie taking that throne. I mean, I guess Martin Scorsese's making a movie, and when Martin Scorsese makes a movie, you have to assume that he could take that and become my favorite movie of the year. But like just in all the elements of it, like this movie really worked for me. I think it's one of Nolan's best, if not even his best. I think it's a really impactful movie. I found it well worth your time. Oppenheimer, 5 out of 5 stars from me. Anyway, that's my discussion. That's my talk on Barbie and Oppenheimer. Which ones have you seen? Are you going to see a double feature, which again, do not suggest. Have you seen Oppenheimer first? Are you seeing Barbie? What is your plan for this weekend? This is great. I love when movies are relevant. This is the first time in quite a while that I feel like both films are in the cultural zeitgeist. I can't think of the last time a movie really took over the cultural zeitgeist. Maybe Avengers Endgame really felt like a huge event. This really feels like a huge event. Both films, I hope both films succeed in really wonderful ways this weekend. Anyway, thank you all for watching this video. My name is Ben Freeman here from the Beniverse Movie Channel. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and take care.